Imagine a newly founded city, bustling with men, warriors, adventurers, and outcasts, but eerily devoid of women. No families, no children's laughter, no future. A city built to die in a single generation. What would you do? Romulus, the first king of Rome, faced exactly this existential crisis and conceived a solution so radical it would echo through history: the abduction of women from a neighboring tribe. But this bold act wasn't just a crime, it became the foundation of what would grow into one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. In the 8th century before Christ, Rome was little more than a village of bandits, shepherds, and fugitives. Romulus had established strong walls and fierce defenders, but he faced an insurmountable problem: the severe shortage of women. Without them, his ambitious Rome would vanish within one generation, becoming nothing more than a forgotten footnote in history. Neighboring tribes refused to give their daughters in marriage to these Roman bandits. What was Romulus to do? His answer would change the course of history: a fraudulent festival, a daring plot, and an abduction that would transform the fate of an entire civilization. The story of the Sabine women isn't just ancient history. It's a tale of desperate measures, unexpected consequences, and the surprising bonds that can form even from the most controversial beginnings. It reveals the brutal pragmatism that characterized Rome's rise to power. If you love uncovering the hidden stories behind great empires and diving into the complex moral dilemmas of the ancient world, hit that like button, subscribe to Legacy of Empires, and join us as we explore the shocking foundations of Rome's earliest days. Stay with us. This story of abduction, war, and reconciliation is just beginning. Rome, in its infancy, was a city of bold ambitions and lofty dreams. Founded around 750 years before Christ, it rose quickly from humble beginnings to become a formidable settlement. Its walls stood tall, its men were strong, and its future seemed promising, except for one critical problem. The city was overwhelmingly male. Romulus had created a sanctuary for outcasts, fugitives, and adventure seekers, mostly men who had left their homes seeking a fresh start. But a city without women is a city without a future. No wives meant no children, no families, and ultimately no next generation to inherit what they were building. Rome, for all its early promise, faced extinction within a single generation. Romulus, ever the pragmatist, recognized this existential threat. He first attempted the diplomatic approach, sending envoys to neighboring tribes, the Sabines, the Latins, and others, proposing marriage alliances. His messengers spoke of Rome's strength, its fertile lands, and the advantages of aligning with this emerging power. But they were met with scorn and rejection. Who would marry their daughters to Roman bandits and vagabonds? The tribal leaders would scoff. Men without lineage, without respectable family names? In their eyes, these Romans were little more than organized criminals, unworthy of their daughters' hands in marriage. One by one, Romulus watched as his diplomatic missions failed. The neighboring tribes saw no benefit in mixing their blood with these Roman upstarts. Some even feared that giving their women to Rome would only strengthen a potential rival. The rejection was unanimous and humiliating. And here's a fascinating historical insight that rarely makes it into the standard telling. According to some ancient accounts, not all Sabine women were entirely unwilling participants in what followed. While the mainstream narrative portrays them purely as victims, some legends suggest that a number of these women were actually dissatisfied with their restricted lives in Sabine society. In those days, Sabine women lived under strict patriarchal rules with limited freedoms. Some historical interpretations suggest that for these women, being taken to Rome, despite the violent means, represented an unexpected path to greater social mobility and freedom than they could have ever experienced in their homeland. Rome, despite its rough edges, was a dynamic young society where old, rigid traditions had not yet calcified. Of course, this doesn't justify what happened, but it adds a complex layer to the story, a reminder that history is rarely as simple as it first appears. Regardless, Romulus found himself in an impossible situation. His city needed women, or it would wither and die. Diplomatic efforts had failed completely. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and in his mind, Rome's very survival was at stake. And so, with his options exhausted, the young king began to formulate a plan so audacious, so shocking, that it would be remembered and retold for thousands of years to come, a plan that would change the course of history and set Rome on its path to empire. With diplomacy exhausted and desperation growing, Romulus devised what would become one of history's most infamous deceptions. In the warm summer months of Rome's early years, he announced a magnificent festival to honor Neptune, god of the seas and earthquakes. This celebration, called the Consualia, would feature horse races, theatrical performances, feasting, and wine flowing freely for all who attended. Messengers were dispatched to all neighboring communities with warm invitations. Come witness the splendor of our new city. Bring your families to enjoy our hospitality and join in honoring the mighty Neptune. The invitation was particularly extended to the Sabines, whose territories lay closest to Rome and whose people were known for their piety and respect for religious observances. Now here's what makes this plan so deviously brilliant. Romulus knew that no tribe would refuse an invitation to a religious festival. In the ancient world, religious celebrations transcended political boundaries. Refusing to participate in honoring the gods could bring divine punishment, something no leader would risk for their people. Even those who distrusted the Romans wouldn't dare offend Neptune. The day of the festival arrived with perfect weather. Some said it was a sign of Neptune's blessing, though in retrospect, it was merely the calm before the storm. Romans prepared elaborate decorations, sacrificial altars, and entertainment venues throughout the city. As visitors began arriving through Rome's gates, they were greeted with exceptional hospitality, their suspicions gradually melting away in the face of such generosity. The Sabines came in large numbers, bringing not only their young women, but entire families, fathers, mothers, children, all dressed in their finest attire for this sacred occasion. They marveled at the city's robust walls, its organized layout, and the evident prosperity of this new settlement. Perhaps the Romans weren't the mere bandits they'd been made out to be. As the festival reached its peak, wine flowed freely, music filled the air, and athletic competitions captivated the crowds. The Sabine men, their guards lowered by wine and festivities, were scattered throughout the celebration grounds. This was the moment Romulus had planned for. A little-known detail about this day, Romulus himself reportedly wore a special purple cloak for the occasion. According to the historian Plutarch, the removal of this cloak was to be the signal that would set the plan in motion. When the celebrations reached their height and attention was fixed on the spectacles, Romulus rose from his seat and, with deliberate slowness, removed his cloak and folded it. In that instant, as though rehearsed countless times, every Roman man of fighting age sprang into action. They ignored the valuables, the elderly, and the children. Their targets were specific and predetermined. The air filled with screams as Roman men seized the young Sabine women. Fathers reached for their daughters only to be blocked by armed Romans. Mothers wailed as their girls were carried away. In the chaos, the unarmed Sabine men could offer little resistance against the prepared Romans. According to the ancient accounts, the Romans captured somewhere between 30 and 700 young women. The exact number varies depending on which historian you read. But regardless of the count, what followed was a scene of utter confusion. The Sabine men, outnumbered and unarmed, were driven from the city along with the elderly and children, while the women were detained within Rome's walls. What had begun as a sacred festival had transformed in moments into one of history's most notorious mass abductions. The foundations of Rome were now stained with this act of calculated treachery, a desperate gamble for the city's future that would soon trigger a war between neighbors and set in motion events that would test the very survival of Romulus's fledgling city. The treachery of the Romans did not go unanswered. As the abducted Sabine women were forcibly married to Roman men, a storm was brewing beyond Rome's walls. The Sabine tribe, devastated by the loss of their daughters, sisters, and brides, burned with righteous fury. King Titus Tatius, leader of the Sabines, was not a man to be trifled with. Historical accounts describe him as both a skilled diplomat and a fearsome warrior, exactly the kind of leader needed in this moment of crisis. For months, he methodically prepared his response, gathering allies from neighboring communities who feared they might be Rome's next victims. What many don't realize is that the Sabines didn't strike immediately. They waited, a calculated decision. Some historians believe this delay was strategic, allowing time for alliances to form, while others suggest a more heartbreaking possibility. They hoped diplomacy might still return their women without bloodshed. By the time the Sabine army finally marched on Rome, nearly a year had passed since the abduction. The women taken during the festival had been living as Roman wives for months. Many had become pregnant or had already given birth to half-Roman children. And here's where the story takes its most unexpected turn. Roman accounts tell us that the Sabine assault was nearly successful. Led by Titus Tatius, they managed what no enemy had yet accomplished, breaching Rome's seemingly impregnable defenses. The fighting was brutal, with the Sabine fathers and brothers battling the Roman husbands in bloody combat throughout the streets. At the height of the battle, with thousands of men locked in mortal combat, something extraordinary happened, something so unexpected that it would be remembered for millennia. The Sabine women themselves, the very prizes being fought over, emerged from their homes with their Roman-fathered infants in their arms. According to Plutarch, a woman named Hersilia led this daring intervention. She had been married to a prominent Roman and had given birth to his child. Gathering the other women, she coordinated what must be one of history's first recorded female-led peace initiatives. In a moment of incredible courage, these women physically placed themselves between the two armies, between their Sabine fathers and their Roman husbands. Many carried their babies, creating a human barrier that neither side could bring themselves to breach. "Would you spill the blood of those who share your blood?" they cried out. "If you continue this war, we lose either way. We will be made widows or orphans by your swords." It was a moment of impossible choice for these women. To side with their birth families meant betraying the fathers of their children. To side with their new Roman husbands meant turning against their own parents and brothers. Instead, they chose a third path, standing for peace when no one else would. This moment reveals something fascinating about ancient Roman society that's often overlooked. While women lacked formal political power, they could wield tremendous moral authority in times of crisis. The sight of these women, once victims, now asserting themselves as agents of peace, created a crisis of conscience for both sides. Titus Tatius and Romulus, the kings of these warring peoples, found themselves frozen, unable to continue the slaughter with these women standing between their armies. Warriors on both sides lowered their weapons, unwilling to risk harming the women and children. What followed was something virtually unheard of in the ancient world. Enemies laying down arms not because of defeat, but because of the moral authority of those caught between them. The battle gradually came to a halt as the cries of the women resonated through the blood-stained streets of early Rome. Did you know that these Sabine women may have actually chosen to stay in Rome? While the initial abduction was undoubtedly violent and against their will, by the time of this confrontation, many had formed genuine attachments to their Roman husbands. Some historical accounts suggest that when offered the chance to return to Sabine territory, many refused, preferring to remain with their new families. If you're enjoying this incredible story of ancient diplomacy, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Tell us in the comments, would you have stood against your own people for the sake of peace? What would you have done in the place of these remarkable women? The courage of the Sabine women not only ended a war, but birthed something unprecedented in the ancient world. In the aftermath of that dramatic battlefield intervention, Romulus and Titus Tatius, two kings who moments before had been sworn enemies, found themselves facing a revolutionary possibility. What if instead of destroying each other, they joined forces? The peace negotiations that followed were unlike anything seen before. Rather than the typical ancient peace treaty where one side dominated the other, this was to be a genuine merger of peoples. The women who had so bravely stopped the fighting now served as cultural bridges between these former enemies. What emerged was extraordinary, a dual monarchy where both Romulus and Titus Tatius ruled side by side. Rome effectively doubled in size overnight. The Sabines moved from their hills into the growing city, bringing their families, their wealth, and their traditions with them. This wasn't merely a political arrangement, it represented something much deeper. The Romans gained what they had desperately needed: women, families, and legitimacy. But they received something equally valuable that few historians emphasize: cultural enrichment. The Sabines were known throughout the region for their piety and religious devotion. They brought with them sophisticated religious practices and deities that Rome quickly adopted. Many of the gods and rituals that would later define Roman religion actually came from this Sabine influence. The famous Temple of Quirinus, a deity associated with the deified Romulus, was established during this period of cultural exchange. But the benefits weren't just religious. The Sabines were accomplished warriors with different fighting techniques than the Romans. When these military traditions merged, they created the earliest version of what would eventually become the most formidable fighting force in the ancient Mediterranean. The distinctive rectangular shield formation that Romans would later use to conquer much of the known world. That has its origins in this Sabine-Roman military fusion. There's a fascinating detail often overlooked in this story. The Sabines brought their aristocratic class and social structures with them. Almost immediately, the Sabine nobility intermarried with Roman leadership families, creating powerful dynastic alliances. These marriages weren't forced like the initial abductions. They were strategic political unions that cemented the new combined state. Rome's famous patrician families that would dominate politics for centuries to come. Many of them traced their lineage to these early Sabine-Roman marriages. The Claudii, one of Rome's most influential families that produced several emperors, proudly claimed Sabine ancestry. Archaeological evidence supports this cultural fusion. Excavations in Rome reveal a clear shift in pottery styles, burial practices, and architectural techniques during this period, all pointing to the influx of Sabine influence. What had begun as two distinct cultures rapidly evolved into something new and more dynamic than either had been separately. Perhaps most significantly, this merger established a pattern that would become Rome's greatest strength: its ability to absorb and integrate other peoples. Unlike other ancient powers that conquered and subjugated, Rome demonstrated from its earliest days an uncanny ability to incorporate others, adopting their strengths while maintaining its core identity. This pattern would repeat throughout Roman history. As they expanded across Italy and eventually the Mediterranean, the Romans consistently extended citizenship and partnership to former enemies. This created loyalty that simple conquest never could. When we examine Rome's later success in building and maintaining the largest empire the Western world had yet seen, we can trace its roots back to this first cultural absorption. The dramatic story of the Sabine women led not just to peace, but to a template for empire building that would serve Rome for the next 1,000 years. In a very real sense, the actions of those brave women standing between armies did more than save lives that day. They inadvertently created the blueprint for what would become the mightiest empire the world had yet known. Rome's destiny as a world power began not with conquest, but with integration. The abduction of the Sabine women remains one of history's most controversial episodes. Yes, it was brutal, calculating, and morally questionable by any standard. But this single act of desperation shaped not just Rome's future, but the destiny of an entire civilization. Think about it. Without this dramatic event, Rome might have withered away, becoming nothing more than a forgotten settlement on the banks of the Tiber River. Instead, it became the foundation of something remarkable. The forced union of Romans and Sabines created a unique cultural blend that would define Rome's greatest strength, its ability to absorb and integrate other peoples. What started as an act of violence transformed into something unexpected. The Sabine women, who began as victims, emerged as powerful mediators and pioneers of diplomacy. Their actions showed that even in the darkest moments, humanity can find paths to reconciliation. But this raises an uncomfortable question that echoes through history. Can desperate times truly justify desperate measures? Rome's eventual greatness was built on this foundation of deceit and violence. Yet it led to centuries of advancement, cultural exchange, and the birth of a civilization that still influences our world today. The legacy of the Sabine women teaches us that history isn't black and white. Sometimes the most questionable decisions can lead to unforeseen positive outcomes, while the noblest intentions might lead to disaster. It's a reminder that judging historical events requires understanding their full context and long-term consequences. If you've enjoyed diving into this fascinating piece of ancient history with us, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your history-loving friends. Subscribe to Legacy of Empires for more epic tales from antiquity, where we uncover the complex stories that shaped our world. From the rise and fall of mighty empires to the small moments that changed history forever, we're here to bring the past to life. And remember, history's greatest lessons often come from its most controversial chapters. Until our next historical adventure, I'll see you in the comments. Let us know what you think. Was Romulus's desperate gamble justified by Rome's eventual success? The debate continues to this very day.